Okay, good morning, and for those of you who knew that we started at 8:15 today as opposed to 8:30, good for you. So we'll probably have some people straggling in, but we want to make sure that we stay on track for the day. So I'm Brian Ludmer, and I'll be pleased to be your chair for today. We have really some excellent panels today and a couple of presentations. The first thing we're going to do, since on day 2, everybody, of course, had their choice of what part of what topic they wanted to sit on, and much as many of us tried, we couldn't quite clone ourselves to hear multiple really good presentations at the same time, but we have the chairs of the different streams from yesterday who are here to give us a summary. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Sandra, Ashish, Linda, and Amy, and they will each speak to their own particular streams from yesterday and summarize what everybody heard. And of course, Tom's good work here will ensure ultimately that the YouTubes, other than obviously the parent track, are posted and you'll be able to download the PowerPoint presentations. But let's hear from the chairs how each segment went. Amy?
All right, so we're going to do it in this order: research, legal, targeted parent, and clinical. So when we had the idea originally to do separate tracks, I was a skeptic. I was like, do we need a research track? Who's going to show up? So the first big idea I want to share with you is we actually had people in the room, which was just really exciting. So that's like, yay, right? Because it means there's more of us. We're a growing team who want to and care about research in this field. All right, so in Tasmania, there's an entire lab devoted to studying parental alienation. And at Colorado State University, Jen Harmon is creating an active program of parental alienation research at her institute. So this is great news that there's beginning to be some institutional support for studying parental alienation. So I'm so jealous. I want that where I am. So another big idea is, I think at this point we can have greater and greater confidence in the estimates of the prevalence of parental alienation. And that's something that people really care about. How, is this a small problem, a medium problem? How big is this problem? I would say when I was writing my notes, I first wrote, we have mounting evidence, but I'm going to say we have pretty much definitive evidence at this point about how painful and damaging parental alienation is for both the targeted parents and the children. That doesn't mean we couldn't learn more, but I think we can say, again, definitively, we know this is a terrible, terrible thing to happen to children and parents. A big idea that came out of yesterday is the importance of using common and, if not common, clear definitions of our terms. So when we say parental alienation, are we talking about the behaviors of the parent, the behaviors of the child, the phenomenon in general? Especially when we're doing research, we have to operationalize our definitions, and when we're talking about it, we have to be clear about what it is that we study. We talked a lot as a group about how there isn't a lot of money for studying parental alienation, and one person used crowdsourcing and GoFundMe, which was fantastic. Who knew? And there are a lot of people who have been personally affected by parental alienation, and maybe there's a people we can continue to go to help support us. And ultimately, ideally, we would like to be able to get federal grants and big corporation and foundation grants to study this. In terms of specific research questions, there are many, 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 and I'm not going to list them all. So I'm going to share some of the themes that we identified as sort of the most pressing. So one of the big themes that we think we need to keep thinking about as researchers is generating data to address the detractors. Those are the hard skeptics that Bill Burnett talked about on day 1. These aren't the people who say, well, it exists, but maybe the intervention should be this way or that way. These are the people who say, banish the very concept of parental alienation. We can't talk about it. We have to understand what these hard skeptics are worried about and then try to conduct research that can address those concerns. So that's one big idea. And I can say that when I used to do expert witness work, when I was cross-examined, opposing counsel would go after those weaknesses in the research. And then there were many times when I would develop a study specifically so that next time, hopefully, if opposing counsel asked me, of course, the next time opposing counsel would ask me about something else, but at least it gave me ideas. So if we think about what are our detractors saying, what do they see as the holes in our research, then that can guide us. Another big idea that came out of yesterday was grounding parental alienation as family violence. If we can communicate more with that community, we might be able to expand our reach and generate more funding and collaborations and expand our acceptance into wider networks of academia and the knowledge. This is one of my pet peeves, is I would love to see if we can do research to evaluate not just the interventions and whether they're effective, we all know that, but research to show, if this is true, that removing children from the home of the alienator and putting them into one of these programs is not like the worst thing in the world to do to these children. Again, as my experience as an expert witness, I can convince a judge alienation is real, and I can convince them that it's happening in this case, and I can convince them that they should do something about it, but it's very hard to get them over that last hump of it will traumatize the children to remove them from the home and put them in a program for 3 days. And we know, just sort of as an aside, that hundreds of thousands of kids are removed from their home every year and put into foster care, right? And the judges don't seem to have a problem with that, and that's putting them with a stranger in most cases. But we have to sort of understand the thought process of the judge and the opposing counsel and the guardian ad litem and the attorneys for the minor children and the therapist, all of whom seem to be stuck, or many of whom are stuck on this idea that it's traumatic for children to be put in these programs. So I think we could study the stress. So I don't think any of us would disagree that it's stressful to remove a child from the home of an alienator and put them into one of these programs, but stress is not the same as trauma, okay? And so if we could study that both in foster care children and in kids who are put into Family Bridges and Linda's program, I think that would be great. I would love to see research on inoculating children, whose parents are just beginning to get divorced, inoculating them from becoming alienated through helping them be true to their values, to understand that they have choices. So when a parent is, trying to get them to spy on the other parent or keep a secret, that they learn how not to feel compelled to do that, and teaching them critical thinking skills. I think we sort of know some of the things that we could be doing to help these kids. It's getting access to them and then studying to see whether these preventative programs would work. And finally, more longitudinal research so we can sort of nail down that causality piece, I think would be really important. And I'm going to end there.
Thank you, Amy. Good morning, all. Welcome back. The legal track was fascinating. We had all of the presentations were absolutely stellar. We began by talking about how parental alienation cases are so counterintuitive that if you just use your professional or clinical intuition, you're bound to fail. It doesn't matter if you have been a practicing lawyer for 25 years or your entire career has been in family law, you have to take the time and effort to learn the science behind the PA cases, work with the top experts, and more than anything, figure out that time is the key. You need to move fast, and you need to ask for appropriate interventions. We moved on to talk about how false memories are created in children, how the perverse triangle of rescuer, victim, and targeted parent work. We talked about how these memories can cause devastating consequences and how it's important to explain to the fact finder, the judge, as to what's the science behind the creation of false memories. We also talked about the importance of parent coaches. When targeted parents are going through tough times, it is important for a professional to hold their hand, talk about what the system is like, how to navigate the litigation, and coach them as they go through the process. And the beauty of this thing is that even though the professionals who made the presentation happen to be in Michigan and Massachusetts, you don't need to be located there. They can do the coaching over the phone over Skype presentations or video and talk to you. That was an eye-opening presentation. We got a wonderful presentation from Brian Ludmer about all the non-family actors in PA cases, how to handle police investigators, child protective services, other professionals, mental health professionals, how to ensure that even though they might seem hostile to you, you are engaged in communication with them and make sure that their files contain accurate and complete stories so that down the line you can use that evidence in cross-examination if you have to. We got a window into the international arena as well, where presenters from Israel, Belgium, UK, and Germany talked about their challenges and their opportunities, how their jurisdictions view PA and what they do about it. We had a presentation about confronting adverse mental health professional. You have a therapist who doesn't seem to believe PA exists or is enabling alienation. How do you cross-examine that expert? How do you do discovery? How do you get mental health records from the professional so that you can later explain to the court what's going on? And finally, we had a presentation about the family court system, which frustrates a lot of litigants, lawyers, mental health professionals, and what would a revamped system look like? And the 10 top takeaways from the presentation was, well, how do you deal with the system that is in place and what can you do about it? Let's see, I think that was it for the legal part. And yes, we had a fantastic question and answers at the very end about the panel, what the lawyers asked questions about how to go about this issue, that issue, which was very productive. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. The targeted parent track ended on a really successful note, and I want to thank all the targeted parents for showing up at this conference. It really is groundbreaking. I was just speaking with Ashish on a walk over here, and he was explaining how it is such a different conference because he hasn't been to other conferences where the targeted parents have been integrated like this. So that was really affirming to hear, and I want to thank all the participants who have come and shared. So basically, the targeted parents, the consensus is they're ready to do more and ready to take it out at another level. The commitment on this has been affirmed. There's all kinds of ideas on what to do. One of the suggestions was to create chapters of PASG in their own communities. To do that, there was a suggestion made that the experts here would create a training program, a PASG training program, that there could be some level of certification that possibly targeted parents or any other interested people would take to their community to do a greater awareness and educational program in the community with the PASG backing. There's lots of solutions put forward in terms of marketing, endorsement. Really feels that that needs to get out at another level, and there's quite a few strong advocates who are willing to put in some time. The other thing that came forth, of course, from the targeted parents is the concern about our children. And Joe Rabiaga's story was really important to hear on the first day. And there's a lot of requests to incorporate as well the adult alienated children to have their voice here in another PASG conference. The appreciation and recognition of the healing component of being not just in the targeted parent track, but at the conference and integrated in the conference was very much emphasized. There's no other place to get the depth of healing and the focus that the targeted parents can receive. The amount of healing that has been received it was 2 days yesterday, so we have another day today, has been tremendous. One of the recognitions of that is being targeted within the family system is one thing, but the structures, the other systems that targeted parents have to go through, the legal systems and the therapy systems and the mental health systems that don't have the awareness of parental alienation that we wish they would all have, ends up being a targeting experience in itself. So the incredible healing opportunity just to be in a room like this right now, sitting beside lawyers and mental health practitioners who validate the experience and affirm and treat targeted parents with respect is tremendous. That healing is really, really tremendously important here. And it enables the targeted parents to go out into the community and to further create awareness and prevention for this to happen to other children, other families. The awareness of the diversity and international component of the conference is incredibly important for people. The targeted parents really appreciated hearing stories from various cultures and other countries, and so we would like that to continue and be emphasized. Another offer was a strong desire for a directory of professionals that targeted parents could access to know who they can go to in their community and who has some awareness of parental alienation, not just says they work with parental alienation, but actually knows what they're talking about. And finally, there is that awareness again that as it is with professionals who may say they have parental alienation, we all know that there's those that say they've worked with parental alienation, then there's those, if I may, like Linda Gottlieb, Ashish, and Dr. Amy Baker here, who actually know parental alienation. So there is that as well within the targeted parents. There are those who are still learning, and then there's those like Kara, who's been at this for 41 years and has a level of expertise and has really gone at another level. In general, the targeted parents who have taken the time to attend the PASG and traveled here, there is a level of expertise, and it's really appreciated that there's an honoring of that.
Thank you. One of the biggest issues that came up and comes up all the time, and it's very, very painful, is what do you do when your child has aged out? And that comes up repeatedly. And I do think we need more work in that area. I think it's a continuum, because I think that we have parents who haven't had any contact with their children for years and years, and they need healing to deal with that wound that never totally, it may scab, but it doesn't totally heal. Then you have another group where there is minimal contact, but the child really doesn't do that much to reach out. What can we do to encourage parents to do something that maybe will get them involved? And then there are a few cases where there is a spontaneous reunification, in the sense that the child has reached out, but how do you help heal that? There's so many feelings in the parent, and so are different levels to deal with that, and I do think it needs more addressing. So that was one area that's, I think, very under addressed repeatedly. Another area that seems to be consistent with all the tracks is credentialing. Who's really qualified to treat parental alienation? There are people saying they're experts and they're not. And on the other side, what do I find it particularly frustrating with therapists who are clearly practicing outside their area of expertise. I think I have tremendous frustration with all too many professionals in my field that don't know what they're doing and aren't interested in learning what to do. So that's a big area. Who would do the credentialing? What would be the standards? How would you weed out the people who say I am an expert, but let's say they're hybrid people? So I think it would be very important if we focused on that area. Of course, institutional changes came out. How do you can work with the courts, the GALs, the lawyer for the children? Very frustrating for parents and professionals. Greater training, even, listen, every time I do a training, as Sal Minuchin would say, this is where we influence each other. I learn from other professionals and parents all the time. It's an interactive process. So we really need to focus on more training for clinicians, maybe lawyers as well, and judges, even if we don't quite get to the credentialing part, which would take longer. The assessment tools, we had some great presentations about great assessment tools. It is one thing. I had a judge recently say that because I said I found for alienation to a 99% clinical certainty, that I was overconfident. It couldn't possibly be right. So just imagine the medical profession saying, that biopsy was too certain. I'm not going to go by it because it's too conclusive. The evidence is there, but if we have the assessment tools in black and white to put in front of the judge and say, here is how we reached our 99% clinical certainty, I think it would be harder to dismiss. So we had some great presentations there. In terms of the issue, yes, I agree with Amy. I often testify, and the judge is convinced it's alienation. They may or may not get the degree of harm that the alienation has done and the degree of child abuse. And then we have the non-expert come in and on pure speculation with absolutely no research behind it, they say it would be too traumatic to the child to remove the child from the environment. They just make it up. Richard Warshak did an article, 10 fallacies in parental alienation, and that's one of the fallacies. It's traumatic. I am pleased and delighted and can't wait till the time goes by that it's out, but Jennifer Harmon at the University of Colorado is doing a research study, a peer-reviewed research study of what happens at turning points. And when I was talking to her about the goals, so to me it was, well, is it successful in reunifying? What happens when the child goes back? What happens, are the gains sustained? What happens if there's contact with an unreformed alienator? So we agreed on that. And then she said to me, well, we also want to show that it's not stressful or traumatic to the child. And I had to think about that for a while. I almost found it laughable because 63 children came through turning points who I've kept track of long term. And 63 came and 56 came under the auspices of their alienated parent. Now, how traumatic can that be? They got on planes from California, Florida. They took 4-hour car rides from Delaware and Maryland. The loyalty conflict, when the court order is imposed, the loyalty conflict frees the child. And the only time that there is stress in that 4-day reunification is when we are exactly talking about the alienation and what happened in the family. If we're in the activity, you would almost never know these kids were alienated on day one. The parent is in the position of parent again, supporter, nurturer. So I'm excited about that research. And I think we still have time for questions, right?
I wanted to share a thought with you all. It was such a wonderful experience to hear from Judge Philip Marcus yesterday and Judge Marie-France Callier from Belgium about their struggles and what they have been able to do when they understand these cases and take the right measures. And it was sort of disappointing to me personally that we couldn't get, despite our attempts to have American judges attend this. And it's not that they don't, they do, and they do take these cases. Many of them have done fantastic work, written wonderful opinions, and they know what it takes to judge these cases. So Brian and I are going to make an extra effort next time as co-chairs of the legal committee to have our judges attend these conferences and talk about the struggles that they have as fact finders when dealing with alienation cases and what they would like from us lawyers, mental health professionals, counselors, clinicians, even target parents, researchers, what tools they need to do their job in the right manner.
Okay, so we're actually ahead of schedule here, so we're going to invite people who have questions for the panel about any of the tracks. And if I'm going to invite everybody to jump in, because as you can hear, a lot of these themes are not just siloed; they apply to each of the separate tracks. So there was a hand over here somewhere. Yes, Joy.
Thank you. In Minnesota, we're getting resistance on the reunification interventions because they say that their new resistance to it is saying that the children just become re-alienated anyway. So I just wanted to share that information. I didn't get a chance to go to the research track, but so far that's what we're hearing a lot of in Minnesota.
I guess that would be like saying, why give a child antibiotics if they're going to get strep throat again, right? I mean, it's fascinating, right? The sort of creative resistance that they have. I would hypothesize that there's some underlying concern, and that's just sort of the latest flavor of resistance, because that doesn't really make sense. But it's just another thing, another avenue for research. I mean, there's actually no evidence. I guess as a researcher, I would sort of pose the question back, like, where's your evidence that that happens, right?
I'm assuming you meant they become re-alienated if they have contact with an unreformed alienator. Is that what you're asking? Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Well, that's not what the research shows. But I also want to say one other question that I thought you might have been saying is, well, don't they get alienated then from the other parent because you have a no contact period? And my answer to that is alienation doesn't apply if the parent is unfit, and an alienator is an abuser. So I just wanted to stress that.
I have the mic.
I'm just going to add one thing from a legal perspective to Joy's question. We have a fair amount of jurisprudence now about what happens on the back end. I mentioned this in the legal track yesterday, and it's quite clear from enough families now that these protective separations do work, and the only time they don't work is if the favored parent is reintroduced either without care, so that regression happens, or without doing the mea culpa, even in front of the children, but where they take ownership, based on the jurisprudence alone, and I'm sure we'll look forward to actual research on that, but the jurisprudence is showing that it does work as a remedy, but for the undermining. So if you control the undermining and you reintroduce the favored parent carefully in stages and you're monitoring for regression, they do work and the proof is there. There was a question over here on the left.
Yeah, actually, I'd like to make a suggestion for a track. Now, the way it's organized, I guess it sort of would go under parents, but I think enough other people would be interested. A track on sort of maximizing social and political engagement. You know, I came here for that. I'm an erased father. And, you know, I was sort of asking everybody, including Brian, you know, what's the best thing to do? Was it to put ballot measures in the state, you know, propositions on the ballot in the states, or deal with lobbyists, or write to your state reps, which I did and nobody replied. So a track on that, I think, would be helpful for us who would like to see change.
Okay, we'll put down an advocacy track for the next conference. Joni?
Professionals broken into categories. We're now incorporating PASG's professionals into that, and it's all being created into a database that will be searchable, so people can reach out to me. As a matter of fact, most of the professionals, when they need somebody, are sending it out and asking me. The other thing, as for chapters, I actually have 45 chapters around the world. I have no issue with turning those chapters over or including PASG into it, because why reinvent the wheel when it's already there? And that takes a lot off of your plate there.
Okay, next. Robert?
Last night during the screening of Racing Families, there was an idea that Jennifer brought up that she had been working on of putting together an 800 line for, to have people call in and to refer out from that line. I think this is a great opportunity for us to make sure that that happens. So if it goes through the organization, if it goes through another organization, but can I ask for a show of hands of people that are prepared to work on it, meaning to organize the groups that will be involved and to put money together. Anybody? Yeah. So if I will meet with you.
Okay, we can deal with that perhaps during the panel on support groups. Yes? Yes.
I'm just wondering, for any of you really, if there's recommendations for clinicians with regard to audio, text messages, those sorts of things that clients are bringing in, because I understand counsel is often having difficulty with admissibility in court.
Okay. Shish, you want to?
I'm not sure I understand your question.
When we're writing reports for the court,
As a clinician,
and we've been exposed to text message, audio recordings that are clearly depicting alienation, any recommendations in terms of how we manage that information in our clinical reports, given the fact that the courts, there's often an admissibility issue?
well, the reports may contain hearsay statements or what you may have reviewed, what you may have observed, conversations and all, but I think you should absolutely call it out. You should point out, in fact, the best reports that I have found are not only those which have pointed out alienating behaviors, but included some specific examples of it. But that gives lawyers like me tools to go back and ask for appropriate intervention. So absolutely call it out.
I think it's partly a foundation issue, and I'm not a lawyer, so I might be using that term wrong, but as an expert witness, I have always relied on those source documents for making the case that alienation is present, and that has never been an issue as long as the foundation has been established that, yes, this is an authentic document.
For every objection in law of evidence, there's an exception. There's a way. And many a times when there are objections, the judges will want to see what's the reason, what is the alienating behavior you are complaining about. And it gives you credibility on the stand when you can say that these are the specific instances that I have viewed and observed and considered in making my judgment call.
I just want to add one more thing. So when I help targeted parents prepare their documents for court, and I know Brian and I talked about this in one of our books, you have to think about levels of evidence, right? So a targeted parent might say, I think the other parent is bad-mouthing me to the kids. Well, how do you know? Well, it must be happening because my kids are mad at me all the time. That doesn't count. And it may be true, but that's like a very low level of evidence because there's a lot of inference involved. So as you go up the levels of evidence to actually seeing something that's objective, like a text message or listening to an audio recording, that's very, very convincing, both for the therapist, for expert witnesses, and then for the judges.
And I'll just quickly stress Shish's point. Judges in family law cases almost universally say we don't like it when parents are recording each other, recording the child, etc. It's even prohibited, even to a criminal law extent in many jurisdictions. Nonetheless, to Ashish's point, where the probative value, where it's just a smoking gun recording that just makes the case, you will get it in because the probative value exceeds the prejudice from tainting the whole family system. Nobody can trust each other because you have an illicit recording. So ultimately, it's just how compelling is the evidence. So we have parents who get copies of kids' journals, and to see what is being written there sometimes is really instructive. It's an invasion of privacy. But if it really helps to get at the truth of what ails the family system, you'll get it in. Next, yeah.
Hi. In the 40 years that I've been support to targeted parent spouses, it took probably half that period, 20 years, till I realized that it had a name to it. And I guess on a positive note, I'm seeing over the years, and particularly in the last handful of years, how awareness is growing in our communities among ourselves as to what it is and what to do with it. One of my takeaways from this conference is I think there's an interesting opportunity for collaboration that might take the form of developing a protocol for interactions with our local school departments, where we might be able to develop a system where they could team with one of the research institutions to be a hub for data collection, to do a PA related survey, annually or something, and along with that could be an education element where we're giving some just very general information to the parent, teacher, student community, and ultimately also a parent support element where by doing those efforts we would be making connections where parents in that community could then have information and resources on how to connect and how to be supported.
Okay, well, our next panel, which we're going to start in a couple of minutes, is going to expand on those themes. Just time maybe for 2 quick questions at this point. Want somebody in the front?
I have a question for Amy. Would you believe that we have enough scientific evidence for the 8 symptoms of the child?
Oh, that's a great question. I think we could use more there, honestly. So the question was, is there enough evidence to support the validity of the 8 behavioral manifestations of alienation? And certainly there is an overwhelming amount of clinical evidence, clinical observations, which is data. But in terms of bringing it up to a more sort of systematic study of those 8 behavioral manifestations, I think we could use more research there. Do you want to do that? Are you taking that on?
Thank you. And I have another question. I heard a continuum of the severity of parental alienation? Do we have measuring tools to establish where the child is on that continuum?
So I think Bill addressed this
Is that a
yesterday.
PARQ?
So there's the mild, moderate, and severe,
Exactly.
and we have operational definitions. But again, I think that is a good place for more research.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, one more question, then we're going to get to the next panel. So we have somebody here in front.
Thank you. I'm from the UK. I've met many of you here. I just want to say that despite what we heard yesterday about the UK system and it's changing, my experience has been somewhat different. I have judges looking at you as if you have two heads sometimes when you insinuate parental alienation. You can't, of course, use that term because that's just not the right term to use in the UK. Coming here is not an accident for me. This is exactly where I need to be, and I want to thank all of you in the room because I now feel like I'm part of a gang, and I genuinely thank you all for that. My point is that I think there's so much that we can all learn from what we've seen over the years in things like Pride, how 20 years ago nobody knew how to celebrate that diversity. I think there's a lot that we can learn as our gang of how we maybe have badges that identify parental alienation, how we create a movement around the world, and I think there's so much that we can learn from what we've seen recently. And thanks for having me as part of your gang.
Okay, we're going to switch up and have our panel on support groups. So I want to thank Amy, Ashish, Sandra, and Linda for sharing with us what happened in the individual tracks. There's a lot there that I'm sure everybody can see just overlaps.